Well, hey guys, welcome to the Reach Right podcast, episode number 30. I am your host, Thomas Costello, and with me, as always, is my co-host,
Ian Hyatt. How's it going?
Oh, going good, Ian. Got a good conversation here today, I think. Should be able to tackle this, and it's the 10 most incredible church statistics of 2021. Always a fun one for us. For the last 5 years, I believe, I think it's 5, at Reach Right, we've put out a post that is the biggest church statistics of the year. And this year, I think we had one that had 25 church statistics, and we put that out just yesterday. That post went out. We'll have the link to that in the description of this episode here. But what we did is we kind of went through that post and found the 5 that each of us that stood out the most, and we get to kind of share that with our audience here today. Some really crazy stuff, I think, as far as statistics. They were really interesting this year because we're coming out of that coronavirus season, or God willing, we're coming out of the coronavirus season. I guess nothing is official yet, so we don't want to count our eggs before they hatch on that. But I think everybody is excited, and we can almost kind of all taste a little bit more normalcy that's right around the corner. Would you agree?
Oh, I would agree, and Lord willing, sooner than later, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're on the same page with that. So, here in Hawaii, we have not had any church services at all because most churches that are evangelical in Hawaii, they meet in the public schools, and public schools have been closed to churches since March. So I have not been in a normal church service in 10 months. And I know you guys are kind of back into services and things there at your church, right?
It's crazy how it varies from state to state and from region to region and such. But we've been back for a while, had to shut down for a little bit, then have been back. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's it. So we have some stats around that too we'll tackle, but I'll go ahead and kick it off with the first one, and we'll just kind of bounce back and forth and share the ones that stood out and give some feedback on them. So number one for me was the Barna Research group. They found that 29% of Americans attended church in the last 7 days, which is down from 48% in 2009. As you look into the statistic, some people you might think, well, that kind of makes sense with coronavirus and all those kinds of things that have been happening. But this stat, actually, it's been in the upper 20s and low 30s for the last 4 years. So since 2017, it's been in that same region, which is it's a 19% decrease from what it was 12 years ago, which is really just startling to see that kind of a decline. I think most of the pastors we talk to, and I know in my own church, I've kind of sensed that, and there's a lot of reasons behind it. I don't know. What do you think are some of the reasons that we're seeing that?
Yeah, it's funny. That's what I was going to say. This was going on before the pandemic, like you mentioned, and we've been seeing this just through our communication with churches that, I've been hearing this, from so many pastors. And I think some of the reasons are, well, there's a lot, right? But, I think just with the way culture's been and the busyness of people, the busyness, everyone is so much busier and preoccupied with so many things now. You got youth sports that happen now on Sundays, which is crazy to me. And my son, he has football games on Sunday. Now, thankfully, those are scheduled after church for us. But I think it's that, and it's the busyness of people, and I think that. I think people are a lot more non-committal with schedules and those things, other than their work schedules that they have to be committed to. Those are a couple things that come to my mind.
I think I've seen a lot more travel happening than used to. I think people just are accustomed to doing more travel on weekends and those kinds of things. I think, and this is good, I would say, by and large, but I think the stigma of missing church is gone. Like there used to be kind of this thing that you had to give an explanation for yourself as to why you weren't at church. And now if you don't go to church, nobody asks you. They don't call you and say, hey, I couldn't help but notice you weren't there on Sunday. They just, they can kind of, they can assume what's going on. But if I could be really honest, I was surprised that this is what Barna found, that 29% of people were in church in the last 7 days. Like that seems really amazing to me. I can't believe that it was almost 50% 12 years ago, but even having it at 29%, I drive around on Sundays and I see what's going on, and I'm surprised that 1 out of 3 or I guess a little under 1 out of 3 people were in church on Sundays. That's really kind of a trip to me. So to me, I don't feel that it's actually more than I would have expected. If you asked me to guess a number, I would have said something more like 15%. But that's really good to hear, I think. So
and
that's number. Go ahead.
I was going to say one other thing came to mind too is I saw some data, I don't know the source, but a little while back that kind of relates to this. It said that a committed church member is someone that shows up now about twice a month, and they're like in a small group or they serve somewhere and they're like giving. So it's kind of that kind of relates to what that stat.
You know what we used to call someone who came to church twice a month back in 2009.
A backslider.
A backslider. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's what we used to call them. So no, we kid about that, but it's just such a different culture nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, I'll tackle my first one here, and it's a little different. But so to switch gears is that the Pew study found that 91% of churchgoers were happy with what their churches were doing with live streaming.
Yeah, that's great.
And so, and I think that's kind of, at first I was like, what kind of intrigued me with this stat was just that I was like, really, that's a lot. Like I was just, because I've seen a lot of bad, live streaming services out there, but I think maybe why that is just because it's a new thing for a lot of churches. We've seen the pandemic, especially for smaller, older, more traditional churches, into live streaming, which is they never thought was probably even helpful before or necessary.
Right.
A lot of things, and I think that even if they were seeing something from someone's phone on Facebook Live, and there wasn't really major to them, that was probably like wow.
Yeah.
That's my guess with that.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting way they worded the question, because I think if you ask them, because there's some other stats that we'll talk about later about people's preferences of live versus streaming, or going in person versus live streaming. And that leads us a different direction on things. But I think that I too have seen a lot of not great live streaming, and I think so many churches were learning on the spot with this. Like we figured out that we had to do something right away on the end of February of last year, and then all of a sudden we all got crash courses in it. We wrote a post called The Ultimate Guide to Live Streaming Your Church Services back in 2019, so well before the pandemic. We put this out here, and it was incredible. In the month of March, we went from seeing maybe 10 visits a day on that post to over like 500 visits every single day of people learning how to do their live stream and everything. So I'm really pleased to hear that so many people were happy with their churches. I think maybe we just give our own churches a lot of grace with that stuff, and just the fact that they're out there and doing something makes us happy. I think there is still some room to improve in those areas for most churches. But that's really good news, I think.
Maybe for some of it's just, I'm just so glad I get to hear and watch my pastor still. So
that's it. That's encouraging to hear. So here, let me share my second one here. It's according to a study by Church Development, which is an organization that helps church fundraise. They said only 5% of churchgoers gave 10% or more of their income. Or tithed, I guess, as we normally would teach it. Only 5% of people would tithe. This was, I don't know that it was surprising to me, but it was interesting to have some data around what I think a lot of us might have expected to see. They had some other stats about people giving 2% of their income or more. It was still less than half of churchgoers give more than 2% of their income. So, but tithing, what I would say most evangelical and many churches teach, I've been someone who teaches tithing, something that I have always taught and practiced, and it's something that God's grown in my life. I was surprised to see that less than 5% of people were actually practically doing that. Now, how they got those numbers, they didn't get a lot of details on their sources on those things here, but I think it's really eye-opening. As someone that is taught on tithing, I have seen, at least in churches that I've pastored, that we saw certainly not half of our people were tithing, but much larger numbers than 5% of them were tithing. So it was an encouragement, I guess, in that way. But I think there's some room to grow there for churches. What do you have to add to that, Ian?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned the encouraging side of that, because first glance, it doesn't look encouraging. But there's most certainly room for growth there.
Sure.
And so, Yeah. Hopefully that's a number that picks up, because that's obviously a big part of what biblical teaching calls us to do. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I think especially in this season right now, I think tithers, a lot people that are giving 10%, typically they're doing it regularly and consistently, and usually it's something that's automated. I assume you do this. I know for me, we have an automated payment that goes to our church on the first of every single month. Maybe it's something weekly. I don't know what it is, but I think that in this pandemic season, encouraging people towards this idea of giving 10% or tithing, for the church's budget, it's important. Even more important is, don't even get me started on the importance of how good it is to the people that are actually doing the tithing. So it's something that's changed my life, practicing that myself. So I think that it's something that churches, we need to really focus on that in this season, I would say.
Same. I totally agree with you, and same here. It's something that's changed my life. And actually, when I was saved, one of the first messages that I heard was on tithing. And I think when you hear that, as a pastor, you're like, oh no, it's going to scare this guy off. I was new to the faith and everything, but man, it actually was one of my favorite messages of all time, because I was on fire for the Lord and just had made that decision. And then all of a sudden, I hear a message about what God promises if you do it. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna take God up on this, and we saw the blessings that He promised right away. So it actually just made me even more on fire. So
to be clear, we're not prosperity preachers here. We're not tithe and you'll be rich type people. That's not what we're saying. We don't even want to get into a debate on whether or not tithing is biblical or not. I've always taught that it is. It's something that I teach. We love our audience that maybe disagrees on that, and but for what it's worth, I think that was eye-opening to see that only 5% of churchgoers gave 10% or more of their income. So why don't you hit your second one for us?
Yeah, I was going to say on that note, let's change the subject. So so this is another live streaming related one. A case study covering several churches using live streaming saw that Georgia's Redeemer Church grew from 12 members, so it was a small church, 12 members, to over 1,000 in a year, and they also get viewers from over 17 countries worldwide. So I think what's really cool about this statistic, it just shows how smaller churches have particularly been impacted by the pandemic, which is when, of course, a lot of churches have upped their game with live streaming, and some have before too, and they're seeing, albeit maybe a different kind of growth, but still seeing growth from people watching their messages, writing in, connecting with them, and then of course some becoming physical members after after they've been watching live. So that's a big deal, because a lot of pastors I know that I've communicated with have thought that, if someone's just going to be watching us on live, live streaming, they're never going to show up in person. But churches have seen actually the opposite. Someone actually feels more comfortable after a certain amount of messages to come. So I think it's really neat. And even if you're not meeting physically, it's another way to grow and maybe see more giving and so on. So
yeah, I think that stat really captures the this transition and really transformation that's happening in the church, that we're moving from physical organizations with a digital presence to a digital organization with a physical presence. It's really kind of a trip to see that. I've heard lots of testimonies that way. Now, I do feel that some of those numbers are sometimes exaggerated because I think that there's just I've seen lots of churches that will count 3-second video views as, new members. That's like counting everybody that drives by your church on the highway as a new member of your church. It's not quite the same, I wouldn't say, but hey, it's still something to celebrate. We're for those kinds of things. And I think we haven't quite even hit the tip of the iceberg, I think, with the revolution that's happening and the opportunity that I think churches have to reach more people in this new digital world that we're moving into. So I think it's going to be exciting.
Good.
Yeah, good. Number 3 for me, it's a Gallup poll found that sermons were the deciding factor in why someone chooses a church. With 76% of churchgoers, they cited that biblical teaching as the most significant reason for attending a church. This was really eye-opening to me, I think, because there's much that's been made about all the church growth practices and all the things that happen out there, and the importance of, and it's not to dismiss this stuff, but worship music and the singing is important, and community is important, and all those things. I don't want to take away from that. But when people are asked to self-identify why they choose a church, it's because they felt that biblical teaching was 76% say biblical teaching was the reason why they chose their church. We've been saying something to this effect for years in talking through this process with pastors, that the main reason why people choose a church is feeling some kind of a connection with the pastor.
Right.
That's always been so important. But I was floored by that such a high percentage of people really cite biblical preaching as something that they really value. You would have expected something else, maybe just something other than biblical preaching. It seems so old school and standard, and so honestly so simple. That's what I love about it. It's like, oh, you mean if I teach the Bible, that's the most important thing to people? That's what they say they want most from a pastor. How refreshing is that, right?
Yeah, no, that you're right. That one surprised me too, more than the 6%. Because, I think that we've known for a while that if someone doesn't like a pastor's preaching, they're probably not going to hang around. You gotta hear from the guy every Sunday. So no, I agree with you. That other one is a little more surprising, but that's good.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, I'll tackle mine. I'll tackle my third point. So there was a study that said 64% of members stayed the same in terms of their faith through the pandemic. And that pastors also said 14% of their people may not be quite as faithful as before, and then 22%, to be exact, are actually growing in their faith. So this was a study done for the pandemic, over the pandemic. So there was a lot of fear that members were going to lose their faith, and especially if like they had a family member that was impacted or died from the coronavirus. And so that was kind of the basis of this study. So again, 64. It's kind of hard to. What also I thought about this is like, how do you measure that kind of? So it's it is one of those where I don't know, but 64% their faith. How do you know that it stayed good, and then 14% they all backslid or something like that? It's kind of funny.
Who's answering the survey saying, no, I mostly backslid in this pandemic time.
Yeah, so. Me, I've changed my mind. God let another pandemic happen, so I'm out. Yeah,
now, these self-reporting type things, it's tough to measure that. I agree, but I guess that's encouraging. I'm surprised by that. I would think that who'd have thought that, and that's, I'm kind of questioning the methodology on that one with you too. Who would have thought that if we got rid of having physical services and people gathered less, that people would say that their faith grew in that time more than they say it went away. Like, it doesn't quite add up to me. But
maybe they're just happy that they didn't have to go to church anymore. I'm stronger than ever before. I just stay home now and
not having to listen to that to that pastor all that time there. I get to sit at home and do it and not listen anymore. It's perfect. So my dream church, it doesn't expect anything of me, and I'm a fully committed member, so it's perfect.
Yeah, I chose this one just because it was kind of perplexing to me. So
I'm with you on that. So my number 4, it's a study from CDF Capital, which again has to do with church finances, and they found that churches of all sizes experienced a 29% decline in tithing and giving since the start of the pandemic. So that's a more sobering statistic. I think I've never talked to a church in all of my time that said they could easily weather a 29% reduction in their income. So that is a pretty sizable chunk. In my experience, what I felt like I heard happening is that we have the benefit of talking to pastors all over the country daily and hearing their stories. And this is more anecdotal, but I found that out of the gates, everything was okay. I think people stayed pretty consistent, and the testimony I heard over and over again is, God, praise God, we're still good. Like everything, all of our needs are met, and our tithing has stayed consistent. We've even heard from some churches that said their tithing went up in this season. Yeah. And I think I heard that through the summer into the middle of fall. And then I think as we got into late fall and the winter, I started to hear some more changes in people's tunes that like, hey, it was good. It's really starting to kind of change now. I think maybe some of those consistent givers maybe have backed off on that, and the idea that it wasn't going to be consistent, like this was going to be a new normal sort of set in on people. I think some of the stimulus money dried up a little bit, and some of the paycheck protection programs, so more people lost jobs, and I think it just became more of a reality. So it doesn't surprise me to see that number, but 29% is a huge number that I think there is going to be real ramifications of in this next year. I think churches have that's a tough road, having to dig out of that. We're talking to more and more that are having some tough staffing conversations and that kind of stuff now. So I expect a lot of those changes and those challenges. I imagine most of our audience is in the middle of that right now and wrestling with some of those. So we're with you guys, and that's hard stuff. So what do you have to add to that, Ian?
Not much, because I was going to say that, that's what I've been hearing. You were exactly right, where what was encouraging is during the summer and, like you said, early fall, I was hearing from, and as you know, I talked to a ton of churches. I was hearing from most churches that their giving either stayed the same or went up. But you're right. And I think that other than the reasons you shared, just how this whole pandemic season has been prolonged kind of had a bit of an effect to that. So, hopefully we'll bounce back, and kind of one of the more discouraging stats, but at the same time, there's some encouragement based on all the other stuff we're sharing. So,
I think churches, I'll just kind of end this point with this, is I think churches need to take that seriously. So if you are seeing a 29% decline, let's be prayerful, be faithful, trust that God's going to increase your what he's giving to you. If you're faithful in the little, he'll give you much. I think all that's true. I think don't dodge those tough questions, though. So I think that there's if in this pandemic, your staffing probably ought to have changed. And I know we're a year deep into it now, and I know nobody likes letting people go or reducing hours or reducing salaries. But I think that just our needs as churches have changed. We don't need a lot of our resources were dedicated to staffing physical events, and those aren't happening as much, or they're happening with fewer people at them. And so I think every church should have probably taken a hard look at that and face that reality. If you're one of those people that's at that 29%, or you're on the higher end of that spectrum, just praying for you guys. But have the boldness to make those tough decisions. That's our encouragement to you.
No, that's good. That's good. Well, I'll tackle my fourth one, and everyone's going to need to bear with me a little bit. It's a little lengthier here, but I did find it very interesting and a good one. Church executive study found that 73% of churches say leaders agree on a coronavirus strategy. However, their members weren't as agreeable with the following, and that was that, in-person gatherings, only 34% were agreeable. Wearing masks, only 19% were agreeable. Worship styles, only 13%. And conspiracy theories, 13%. And then only 9% said they didn't have any divisiveness with these topics. And the funny thing that came to mind to me when I first saw this was that the whole wearing of masks. As you know, I'm in Texas, and I've been thankful that we've been a little more open and that we've been able to meet. Our church was requiring masks. However, we had people that they would come in and they'd sit down in their seat, and I would just, it was pretty humorous to me, actually. They'd take off their mask and throw it down in anger. So there I was to say that we wore it in, but now we're sitting. So these are real kind of disagreements that churches have been dealing with. But again, the interesting part too is that 73% of the leaders were on board with the strategy, but not so much with members. So it was kind of funny to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I'm glad to hear the unity among leaders, because I think that's where this kind of stuff starts. But it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, to think it's as if we might have some divisiveness in our country or in the world right now. It's really strange, shocking, right?
Weird. Yeah.
It's weird that it even carries over into the church as people bring their lives into that, and it's messy. Yeah. I think it's a challenging thing. I think I've seen the same thing of people. We have little mini mask protests. I really feel for pastors. Like, what do you do in that situation if you say we require masks and then someone doesn't wear a mask, or in your case, I'm sure dozens or maybe hundreds of people in a mega church. Are most people wearing masks in your church right now?
Yeah, most are. It's been a tough thing personally for our church to kind of police.
How do you do that? Right?
Everyone wears them for the most part, and then but we do have a good chunk. If I were to guess off the top of my head, maybe about 20% that once they get inside the sanctuary, take them off, and they're distanced.
That's a few hundred at your church, though, right? That's
right,
not
exactly. Yeah,
that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? I mean, do you have to have 300 ushers there to come and talk to every single one of these people? And it's challenging, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to escort them out? Are you going to handcuff them? Are you going to turn them over to the police? What do you do in those situations? So, pastors, man, we feel for you guys. That is so hard to try and figure that out. God bless you guys as you try to navigate that whole thing. But don't be discouraged. Know that the problems you're seeing in your church, everybody's seeing them too. So we're all on the same boat with this, and there's going to be some challenges with it. And I've heard stories of people leaving churches over these issues, and it's tragic to hear. The Lord doesn't want it. I think that's the enemy at play for sure. Yeah. But we feel for you, pastors, as you navigate that whole thing. So let me get my last one here. It's according to Barna, 71% of boomers want in-person services. And that number for Gen X is 47%. For millennials, 42%. For Gen Z, it's 41%. So what this says is the older you are, and the more at risk of coronavirus you are, the more you want to be in service with other people. And the younger you are, the less likely you are to want to be in service with other people. So it really is... I don't know. I guess I'm not surprised by it, but it seems counterintuitive that the people most in danger are the ones most wanting to be with other people and in service. Yeah. I would guess that because they're most comfortable. This is what they've been. If you're a boomer, that means you're probably in your 60s at this point, or older than that. And so it would be something that this idea of digital church is probably something that's newer. It's newer to everybody, but you've had decades and decades of being in-person services, and a transition like that, I imagine, would be especially hard. You and I, as Gen Xers, I think that you and I are both we still see value, obviously, in the in-person gathering. We really miss that. I know I really miss it a lot, and I'm excited to go back when it is safe to do that, and we're able to. I don't know. It's something that is surprising to me, but I think there's a reckoning coming for churches when we're looking at that Gen Z, that they would prefer, in this study, they prefer to be in online services. And the same goes for millennials and even a lot of Gen X. They would say their preference is to be online here right now. So that's surprising to me. And I think that we can try and resist that. And I think there is some merit. I'm going to die on that hill of saying that the gathering of the saints in person is no longer valuable. I'm not going to ever go there. But I think that we're fighting a losing battle if we are insisting on exclusively only services happening in person and not giving people options to do things online. So what's your take?
No, I totally agree with that. And it's funny, what came to mind was I thought of my son, who often plays the Fortnite video game. Well,
You just called it the Fortnite? Is that right? You said the Fortnite?
The Fortnite. It's Fortnite. I know that. But identifying which game by using the. Anyway, my gosh,
like
now you're
Facebook.
Making me feel old. Now we're talking about So anyway, Fortnite. If people don't know, it's a virtual game where you can play others online and connect with them online, like a lot of video games these days. But anyway, these kids now, or people that play this, have Fortnite friends, and it's the only time they have like what they consider close relationships with people, online, just playing this video game. And the reason I think that comes to mind is, again, the younger generations are used to digital, virtual already. This was stuff already going on before the pandemic and everything. So I think that, that's why I'm kind of not surprised a little bit. I think that I'm surprised how much, when I think of my son, that he feels close to someone that he just plays video games with. So, and it's different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, good segue. This is actually a good segue to my fifth and final one, and that's that Church Executive found that in America, 70% of churches in the Midwest are back to in-person gatherings. In the western part of the country, only 57% are back to in person. So I guess, well, I think that's a good segue. Is the encouragement is a lot of churches are gathering again and back to in person. So not just for the boomers, but the other the Gen Xers and the millennials that you just mentioned, we're also preferring that. There's some positive, I think, to that too. But again, to your last point on your last stat, I think that even as we see an increase in this, that's great. That's encouraging to me. I prefer in person, but at the same time, we shouldn't forsake the digital part of worship as well, because that's going to continue to be a need. So I think that's a good takeaway from that.
I couldn't agree more. Again, back to that idea that this is churches. We are not an organization that like surrounds itself or rallies behind a building. We're an organization that rallies behind a cause, and causes can be physical and they can be digital, and they can be really contagious online, and we have a huge opportunity. So I think that this, in the end, my prayer is that this coronavirus season will be a landmark time that we look back on, and we won't look back on it maybe fondly of like we enjoyed that time, but I think it was kind of like a shake that we may have needed in the church to say, we have to change our methods. Our message is going to stay the same, but we have to change our methods immediately. And I think this got us, a lot of us, to change our methods. And one of the biggest mistakes we can make is to go back and say, let's go back to our old methods, our old wineskins, and not use these ones that we spent all this investment, this time learning, and we really worked on. I think we need to continue to press forward in this area of doing church digitally and really thinking about this, continuing to think about these kinds of things and really pushing forward in this area, because these Gen Zs and millennials and Gen Xs even, like, this is what the church of the future is going to look like. Again, I'm going to die on the hill of saying we're going to gather in person still at some point. Like that's going to happen. We're going to fight for that. I think that's important. We don't forsake the gathering together of the saints. That's really important. But we need digital options, and this is where the gospel has one of its biggest opportunities, I think, to go forth. And this is really, I believe, the way that the prophecy of going into all the world and preaching the gospel, this is the clearest way that it's going to happen, is through digital means, where we still will be going to other places, but doing it digitally. It's just an enormous opportunity that we can't step back from, I think, at this point.
Agreed. No, I think that's well put, partner. And we want to leave that as, I think, a great encouragement to our pastors.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So that's it, guys, for this week. We appreciate you listening. As always, we ask if this is something that has been beneficial to you. It means the world to us if you rate, review, subscribe, like, do all those things wherever you're watching us, whether it's on YouTube or on the podcast. We appreciate you as our audience, part of our Reach Right family. And we'll catch you next week.
See ya.